Jack Holt heard the sound before he saw anything. A sharp crack, dry and final like wood snapping in deep cold. He was halfway down the ridge above Cold Creek boots, sinking into knee-high snow, a bundle of trapped pelts slung over his shoulder. Winter had settled hard in the Bitterroot Valley, the kind of cold that didn't just chill the body, but pressed straight into the bones. Jack had learned to move quiet in weather like this. The mountains demanded it. The sound came again. Metal this time. A bucket, he thought. Then a smaller sound almost lost to the wind. A breath forced out of a small chest. Jack stopped. From where he stood, he could see the town spread below him. Cold Creek was little more than a handful of buildings crouched along a frozen road. Smoke rose thin and straight from chimneys, the air too cold to bend it. Near the center of town stood the old well stone-lined its rope stiff with ice. A child lay beside it. Jack didn't think. He dropped the pelts and started running. The slope was steep and treacherous. Snow slid under his boots, sending him skidding more than once, but he didn't slow. He could see the boy now. Too small. Coat too thin. One arm twisted under him at an angle no child's arm should rest. What stopped Jack cold wasn't the fall. It was the stillness around it. Doors were shut, but curtains were not. Faces hovered behind glass. A woman stood at the window of the mercantile, one hand pressed to her mouth. A man paused in the street, looked down at the boy, then looked away, and kept walking. Someone crossed to the far side of the road to avoid the well entirely. No one moved. Jack hit the bottom of the ridge and ran straight into the street, his breath burning his lungs. When he dropped to his knees beside the boy, the cold hit him full in the face. The child's lips were blue. His lashes were rimmed with frost. "Hey, Jack," said, his voice rough from disuse. "Hey, kid. You hear me?" The boy's eyes fluttered, barely open. They were a pale gray, already dulled by cold and fear. "Pa," the boy whispered. The words scraped out of him thin as paper. Jack swallowed. "No. No, I'm not your pa." He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around the boy, pulling him close. The child weighed almost nothing. "But I've got you. You hear me? I've got you." The boy shivered once violently, then sagged against him. Jack looked up. The town was watching. Faces in windows. A man standing in the open doorway of the general store. Someone on the porch of the boarding house. They all saw Jack kneeling there in the snow, saw the child limp in his arms. No one spoke. "Does he have a family?" Jack called out. His voice carried sharp and angry. "This boy needs help." "Where's his people?" Silence. A door creaked closed somewhere. A curtain slid shut. Jack felt something twist in his chest. He'd seen fear before, seen cruelty too. But this was something else. This was a whole town deciding together to do nothing. He stood lifting the boy more securely. "Fine," he muttered. "Then I'll find them myself." As he turned, he caught sight of a young woman standing near the edge of the street. She wore a deputy's coat, the star dull with age and neglect. Her hat was pulled low, but her eyes were fixed on the boy in Jack's arms. There was something in her expression, conflict maybe, or shame. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. She didn't stop him. Jack carried the boy past the well, past the turned faces, following a memory he hadn't known he still had. The boy stirred once, clutching weakly at Jack's shirt. "Finn," he whispered. "My name's Finn." "All right, Finn," Jack said. "Just hold on." The Holt place sat at the edge of town, where the road began to thin and the land rose toward the foothills. The fence leaned inward, broken in 3 places. Snow choked the path to the porch. Smoke rose from the chimney, but it was thin and uneven, Jack climbed the steps and kicked the door with his heel. "Hello," he shouted. Anyone inside the door flew open. A woman stood there with a shotgun leveled at his chest. "Put him down," she said. Her voice shook, but the barrel didn't. "Put my boy down, or I swear I'll pull the trigger." Jack froze. Slowly, carefully, he lowered Finn to the porch, keeping one arm around him until the boy sagged against the wall. Jack raised his hands. "Ma'am," he said, steady and calm. He collapsed by the well. "He's freezing." The woman's eyes flicked to Finn. Her face, too pale, too thin, crumpled for half a second before she caught herself. "Finn," she breathed. "Oh, God." She lowered the gun and dropped to her knees, pulling the boy into her arms. "Mama's here," she whispered. "I've got you." Jack stepped back, giving her space. He took her in then. Mary Beth Holt, though he didn't know her name yet. Fever-bright eyes. Hair pulled back in a loose braid, strands falling free. A woman holding herself together by will alone. She looked up at him again, sharper now. "Who are you, Jack Holt?" he said after a pause. The name still felt strange in his mouth, like something borrowed. "I was passing through." She studied him, searching for lies. Why help? Jack thought of a different winter. A different child. He didn't answer. Mary Beth didn't press. She gathered Finn into her arms and struggled to stand. Jack moved without thinking, taking the boy from her and carrying him inside. The house was cold, but not dead. A fire burned low in the hearth. Bottles sat on the table, medicine mostly empty. Jack laid Finn on a narrow bed and pulled blankets up around him. "Water," Mary Beth said, her voice tight. "I need water for the medicine." Jack nodded. "I'll get it." He stepped back outside, took the broken bucket from where it lay by the door, and headed for the well again. Halfway there, he stopped. The stone rim of the well was slick with ice. The rope hung stiff and unused. Jack looked down into the dark, then back toward the town. The memory hit him then uninvited. Another well. Another winter. Another man found dead where he shouldn't have been. Jack clenched his jaw and forced himself to move. When he returned, Finn was awake. Weak, but watching. "You came back," the boy said. Jack handed the water to Mary Beth. "I said I would." Finn nodded solemnly, as if that settled something important. Mary Beth watched Jack over the rim of the cup as she helped Finn drink. "People don't usually come back," she said quietly. Jack met her gaze. "They should." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards of the porch. Somewhere in town, a bell rang once. Jack felt the weight of the valley press in around the little house. As he stood there warming his hands by the fire, he understood something with a clarity that made his chest ache. Saving the boy was the easy part. Whatever had made an entire town turn its back, that was still waiting. And it wasn't finished yet. "If you don't put my boy down, I'll shoot." The barrel of the shotgun didn't waver. Her hands were shaking, her face pale and drawn, but her grip on the weapon was steady. Jack Holt knew that kind of desperation. He'd seen it before in soldiers, in mothers, in himself. "I already did," he said quietly, raising both hands. "He's right there. Safe." The woman's eyes flicked to the small form bundled in blankets on the narrow bed behind Jack. She hesitated, breathing hard, and then finally lowered the shotgun. Not all the way. Just enough. "I don't know you," she said. "Name's Jack Holt. That's not a name I've heard around here. I'm not from around here." Silence hung between them. The fire cracked but offered little warmth. Outside, wind scraped frost across the windows like claws. The woman moved past Jack, dropping to her knees beside the bed. She touched the boy's face, brushing wet strands of hair off his forehead. Her hands trembled, as she checked his breathing, his pulse. Jack stepped back and gave her space, watching her. She didn't ask if Finn was okay, she already knew he wasn't. She just kept touching him, like if she stopped, he'd disappear. "I found him by the well," Jack said after a moment. "Collapsed, half frozen." She nodded once, eyes still on her son. "He's been trying to take care of me since the fever took hold." Her voice cracked on the last word. "You're his mother." She finally looked up. Mary Beth Holt. Her gaze sharpened. "Why did you bring him back?" Jack didn't answer right away. He looked around the cabin, simple but clean, though the cold had crept in through every wall. A table with half-used bottles of medicine. A single cot. The smell of cedar smoke and damp wool. "I didn't see anyone else running to help," Jack said. Mary Beth's jaw tightened. She turned back to Finn, resting her hand on his chest. "He's been the only one going out. To the well, to the woods. Trying to keep us both alive. I told him not to, but he doesn't listen. He's stubborn like his father." Jack leaned against the wall near the fire. "What happened to his father? Dead," she said flat. "Fell into the well last winter. Broke his neck. They say he slipped." "You don't think so?" Mary Beth looked at Jack like she was trying to read something deeper in his face. It was icy, that's what they all said. But Sam was sure-footed. Grew up on a ranch, worked cattle in worse weather than that. Jack didn't press. He'd seen people tighten up when the truth pressed too close. Instead, he crouched beside the fire, stoking it with care, feeding it dry pine from a pile beside the hearth. He said if anything ever happened to him, Mary Beth continued softly, "I should be careful. That some men in town were watching us." Why, she shook her head. "Never told me. Just said he'd stopped digging. That he wanted to be done with it." Digging, Mary Beth's voice lowered. "He used to be a lawyer, back east. Worked for the government. Said he left that all behind when we came here. Just wanted to raise a family, grow some vegetables, keep to ourselves." Her hand curled into a fist in Finn's blanket. But something changed last year. He got quiet. Started going through land records. Said something wasn't right with the way farms were changing hands. Jack's pulse ticked up. "You still have those records, I don't know." He kept most of it in his head or stashed away. Said it was safer that way. Finn stirred. Mary Beth leaned down, whispering something Jack couldn't hear. The boy blinked slowly, then looked past his mother directly at Jack. "You're not bad," he said. Voice raspy but clear. Jack blinked. "What?" The boy stared up at him. "You've got sad eyes. Not mean ones." Mary Beth smiled, just barely. "He always says things like that. His father used to call it old soul talk, like he sees through people." Jack didn't reply. The kid wasn't wrong. "I need water," Mary Beth said. "For the medicine." Jack moved to grab the kettle without being asked. He stepped outside, filled it with snow from a clean drift near the porch, and set it over the fire when he returned. His movements were efficient, automatic. Something about this place, it reminded him too much of the one he lost. Too much of what he'd run from. He sat in silence, listening to the wind batter the walls, to Mary Beth humming something low and broken near her son. "You ever think about leaving?" Jack asked quietly. Mary Beth didn't look at him. "All the time. So why don't you?" She turned. "With what I've got, no money? No family left? No wagon? No horses? Just this house and a boy who thinks it's his job to keep me alive." Jack didn't answer. He understood too well. Sometimes you stayed not because you believed you'd survive, but because running meant giving up, and some people couldn't do that. Not when someone else was depending on them. The kettle whistled. Mary Beth poured water into a mug, mixed it with a thick syrup from one of the medicine bottles, and helped Finn drink. The boy coughed after each swallow, but didn't fight her. Jack stood and moved to the door. "I should go. You've got enough to handle." Finn's hand shot out weak but fast. He gripped Jack's coat sleeve. "Don't go," he whispered. "You came back. That means something." Mary Beth looked at them both, something unreadable moving behind her eyes. Jack didn't move. Outside, the snow had begun falling again, soft and steady. "If you want," she said at last, "you can stay the night. Just by the fire." Jack nodded once. "Thank you." She hesitated. "But if you try anything, I've still got that shotgun." "I believe you." Mary Beth helped Finn settle deeper into the blankets. Jack stoked the fire again, adding a thick log that crackled in the heat. He sat with his back to the hearth, the warmth seeping slowly into his limbs. The wind howled outside. Inside it was quiet. Too quiet. Jack stared into the fire, the boy's words still echoing. "You've got sad eyes. Not mean ones." Mary Beth didn't trust him yet, but the kid saw something. Maybe that was worse. He closed his eyes just for a second. And in that second, the memory came sharp and brutal. His own son coughing in a dark room, his wife pale and soaked with sweat. The letter that arrived too late. The grave dug by hands still bleeding from the ride. He opened his eyes. No. He wouldn't run this time. He looked at the boy sleeping across the room and made a silent promise to a dead man he never met. "I won't let him die in the cold." Outside, the wind shifted, and in town something moved, quiet, watchful, waiting. Son says he saw a hand push his father into the well. The words whispered in Jack's mind. Tomorrow he'd ask the boy more, because if that was true, then this wasn't just about survival. It was about murder, and someone in Cold Creek didn't want it found out. "You could draw his face, if I asked you to." Jack asked the question without looking directly at the boy. The room was quiet, except for the low crackle of the fire and the wheezing sound of Finn's breath as he shifted under his blankets. Morning had barely broken, gray light bleeding slowly into the cabin through the frosted window panes. Mary Beth was asleep in the rocking chair, arms folded across her chest, face pale and drawn. She hadn't let herself rest until sometime past midnight, only nodding off when Jack promised he'd keep watch. Now Jack sat on the floor near the fire, whittling a small piece of pine. The sound of the blade moving against wood kept his hands busy, but his mind had turned over the boy's words from the night before, again and again. Someone pushed Papa into the well. He hadn't wanted to push the kid. Trauma twisted memories, but something about the way Finn had said it, clear calm with that odd sense of certainty, unsettled him. Now Finn lay with his eyes half open watching Jack. "I could," the boy said. Jack stopped carving. "What I could draw his face. The man who did it." Jack turned toward him fully now. "You sure about that?" Finn nodded. "I remember him. His coat was black, not church black, dirty black. And he had this kind of scar near his ear. Not big, just a line, like a crack in a plate." Jack set the pine and knife aside slowly. "That's a lot to remember for something that happened a year ago." Finn looked at him, eyes sharp. "I remember everything about that day. I was on the other side of the barn. I saw my papa go out to check the rope on the well. He said it froze sometimes. Said it was dangerous." Jack nodded, encouraging him gently. "I saw the man walk up behind him, quiet, like a shadow, and then he shoved him." Finn's voice didn't rise. He wasn't telling it like a child repeating a nightmare. He was reporting it, cold, measured. "Did you tell anyone?" Jack asked. "I told Mama. She didn't believe me at first. Then she got scared. Told me not to say it again. Said if it was true, it was dangerous." That tracked. You think you could draw him? Jack asked again. Now Finn nodded, eyes serious. You got something to draw with, Jack? Looked around. Mary Beth stirred in the chair, groaning softly. He found a half-burnt pencil and the back of a receipt tucked inside one of Samuel's old books. He handed them to the boy. Finn adjusted himself, wincing with effort, but didn't complain. He started to draw. It took time, slow, careful strokes. Jack watched the way his hand moved. Finn wasn't just doodling. He was focused, intent. There was something eerie in how precise he was for a kid who couldn't be more than 8 or 9. When he was done, he handed the paper to Jack. Jack stared at it for a long time. The face was angled slightly downward, as if caught mid-stride. The scar near the ear was there, just as Finn described. Heavy brows, a lean, hard jaw, deep lines etched along the mouth, and the eyes. Cold, watchful, familiar. Jack's stomach tightened. He knew that face. He'd seen it in a wanted poster once years ago, and again briefly through the scope of a long rifle in a southern desert under a dying sun. A ghost with a new name. Elias Crane. Though back then he'd gone by Edward Harper. Jack looked at Finn. You sure this is the man? The boy nodded. I'll never forget him. Jack stood abruptly, moving toward the door. The sudden shift stirred Mary Beth awake. What's going on? Jack handed her the drawing. She paled. He drew this? He did. She looked from the page to her son. Finn, where did you see this man? Before Finn didn't answer. He was staring at Jack now. You know him. Jack didn't answer right away. His voice when it came was low and grim. I tried to kill him. Once. Mary Beth's breath caught. Who is he? Jack's jaw tightened. Back when I was a tracker for the U.S. Marshals, he was on a list. Hired gun. Worked for anyone with enough money to get someone removed. We almost caught him near El Paso. He left 2 of my men dead and vanished. I thought he was gone for good. Why would he be here? Mary Beth asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Jack looked out the window toward the quiet town. Because someone's still hiring him. He turned back. You said Samuel had land documents, notes. Do you know where he kept them? Mary Beth hesitated, then moved to the far wall. She pulled up a loose floorboard beneath the table, revealing a wrapped bundle of papers and a leather-bound journal. Jack crouched beside her and opened it carefully. Survey maps, deed copies, notes in tight handwriting. One name appeared more than once, Union Western Railroad. Jack scanned further references to land seizures, suspicious deaths bribes. Samuel hadn't been chasing shadows. He'd been building a case. Mary Beth whispered. He said he was close to something, that someone was buying up the valley too fast, pressuring folks to sell. When he started asking questions, people stopped talking to us. Cold Creek turned cold. Jack nodded slowly, reading the final page of Samuel's notes. It ended with a single line, if anything happens to me, the rope on the well isn't what failed. He stood. I need to talk to someone. A man named Clayton Briggs. Samuel trusted him. Mary Beth stiffened. He lives out in the timberline. I know. I've met him. Years back. She didn't stop him. Finn's voice came again, quiet, steady. If you find that man again, don't miss. Jack paused at the door, looked back at the boy. I don't plan to. Outside, the sun had begun to rise behind the ridge. Light spilled across the white fields, untouched and silent. But the silence was deceptive. Jack could feel the shift now, like a mountain waking under the snow. Someone in Cold Creek had blood on their hands, and the only man who might still hold the full story was hidden deep in the woods, old, wary, and maybe already hunted. Jack pulled his coat tight and stepped into the wind. The hunt was on again. You don't want to keep digging, son. We already buried it. The old man's words drifted through Jack's thoughts as he rode into Cold Creek against snow crunching under the hooves of the borrowed mule. The morning had come hard, sky overcast cold, sharp enough to draw tears from the corner of his eyes. The town looked smaller in the daylight, more brittle. Buildings sagged under the weight of snow. The church steeple stood crooked like an old finger pointing nowhere. Jack saw the mercantile, the boarding house, the livery. Curtains shifted as he passed. No one waved. No one smiled. They all knew. They always had. Jack hitched the mule outside the general store and stepped through the door. The bell above him jingled sharp and hollow. Inside the room went still. 3 men stood at the counter. A woman behind the till froze mid-motion, her hand halfway to the drawer. Every pair of eyes in the place locked on him. Jack gave a slow nod. Morning. No one replied. He walked past them without another word toward the back where an old bulletin board sagged under fading notices. Among them, yellowed deeds and handwritten for sale signs. But what caught Jack's attention was a name he hadn't seen in years. Union Western Railroad, Regional Development Meeting, Town Hall, Feb. 2. He tore the flyer off the wall. Behind him, one of the men muttered, "Thought he ran off years ago." Another said, "Some folks don't know how to stay gone." Jack turned slowly, folding the paper. Some folks come back when they smell rot. The men looked away. The woman behind the counter cleared her throat. "Something I can help you with." "Looking for Father Thomas," Jack said. Her eyes flicked to the cross around her neck. "Church is locked this time of morning. Where can I find him?" She hesitated. "He stays in the rectory behind the chapel. Might be out at the mill, though. Says he walks to clear his mind." "Thanks." Jack turned to leave and no one said goodbye. Outside, the wind picked up. Jack headed toward the church, skirting around the square eyes, scanning the rooftops out of old habit. Something about the quiet felt staged. Too many eyes watching from shadows, too many folks trying to look busy, doing nothing. The chapel door creaked as he pushed it open. Cold air followed him in. The place was dark, unheated. Candles sat unlit along the altar rail. A heavy Bible lay open at the front pew pages, slightly curled from damp. Jack waited. It didn't take long. Father Thomas Hale stepped in from the side door, brushing snow from his coat sleeves. He was older than Jack remembered, stooped, thinner eyes sunk deep into hollows, but those eyes were still sharp, still dangerous in their own quiet way. Jack Holt, the priest, said, removing his hat. "Father." The 2 men stood across from each other, silence between them, like the space before a bell tolls. "I heard you'd come back," Thomas said. "Didn't believe it." Jack raised an eyebrow. "I didn't come back for confession." "No," the priest replied, walking slowly to the front pew. "But I expect you'll find something worth confessing before you're through." Jack followed him, standing near the altar. "I'm here about Samuel Holt." The priest stiffened, but didn't sit. "That boy did good. Tried to stand for something even when it cost him." "You think his death was an accident?" Father Thomas looked away. "Does it matter what I think?" Jack took the drawing from his coat and unfolded it. The pencil lines were faded now, but the shape of the face remained sharp. Finn saw him. Said this man pushed his father into the well. Thomas stared at the picture for a long time. "I know that face." "So do I." Jack stepped closer. "You know who hired him?" The priest said nothing. "I think Samuel was getting close to something." Jack continued. "Land records, forged deeds, a railroad that needs this valley cleared fast." Thomas turned back to him, and there was something tired and dangerous in his expression. You think you're the first man to notice there's been others. One of them tried to publish in Missoula. They found him face down in the Clark Fork, head cracked open like a melon. Jack frowned. And you said nothing. I said what I could when I could. People don't listen when it costs them comfort. Jack stepped forward, heat in his voice now. A man is dead. His son nearly froze to death in a town full of people who won't lift a finger. You saw something. You knew something. And you let it happen. I'm a priest, Jack. Not a sheriff. Not a judge. No. You're just the man who buries the bodies after. The words landed hard, but Father Thomas didn't flinch. He walked slowly toward the altar, ran a hand along the edge of the pulpit. We all choose our fights, he said. Some of us choose too late. Jack stepped forward again. Well, I'm choosing mine now, and I need help. Thomas turned. What do you want from me? Jack held up the drawing. You tell me where I can find Clayton Briggs. Thomas's eyes narrowed. You looking to stir up more dust? I'm looking for the truth. Truth gets men killed around here. Jack's voice was low now, steady. That boy watched his father die and never said a word because he knew no one would believe him. His mother's sick. The house is falling apart. And he still tried to save her by himself. That kid's braver than half this town. The priest sighed and moved to the window, looking out over the white expanse of the valley. Clayton's up past Grizzly Notch, he said finally. Still has his cabin out there. Doesn't come down much anymore. I'll find him. Father Thomas didn't turn. Jack, be careful what you dig for. He touched the wood of the cross that hung from his neck. Sometimes graves don't stay closed because we dig them up. Sometimes they never closed right in the first place. Jack didn't answer. He left the chapel without another word. As he stepped into the cold once more, wind kicked up a swirl of snow around his boots. From the edge of town, he saw a familiar figure, Deputy Ruth Calder, standing outside the jailhouse watching him, her posture stiff, unreadable. She didn't speak, just watched. And that was answer enough. They all knew, but not everyone wanted it known. Jack mounted the mule and turned north toward Grizzly Notch. The road ahead was quiet, but something told him the past was already waiting. If you want justice, bring a gun. The door didn't open right away. Jack stood outside the narrow cabin at the timberline, his breath clouding in the sharp mountain air. Snow drifted across the clearing untouched, but for the hoofprints behind him and the steam rising from the mule's back. The silence up here wasn't like the silence in Cold Creek. This one wasn't full of guilt or secrets. It was just the cold kind, the honest kind. He knocked again, 3 times. Still nothing. Then the click of a hammer being drawn back. Back off that porch, Holt, and keep your hands where I can see 'em. The voice was old, gravel thick, and coming from somewhere off to the side, not from inside the cabin. Jack didn't move. Come on, Briggs. It's been 10 years, not 10 lifetimes. Another long pause. Then a rustle in the trees, and Clayton Briggs stepped out from the brush rifle, aimed and steady. He looked older than Jack remembered, grayer, with a wild beard and lines carved deep around his eyes. But the grip on the rifle didn't shake. You look like hell, Clayton muttered, lowering the barrel. I'm just returning the favor. Clayton barked a humorless laugh and gestured toward the cabin. Get inside, before we both freeze solid. They ducked into the one-room cabin, heat pulsing from a wood stove in the corner. Jack pulled off his coat and gloves, rubbing his hands together. The inside was sparse, just a cot, a table, a pot of beans, steaming gently over the stove, and a scattering of old newspapers nailed to the walls for insulation. Still living like a monk, Jack said. Better than living with people. Clayton handed him a chipped mug of something dark and bitter. Jack took it without comment and stood near the stove, letting the heat soak into his bones. "You're not here to catch up," Clayton said, leaning against the wall. "So go on, get to it." Jack pulled the folded drawing from his coat pocket and handed it over. Clayton stared at it for less than a second before his face darkened. "God damn, you recognize him?" "Course I do. Elias Crane. Though he was calling himself Harper when I saw him last. Same." Clayton dropped into a chair and took a swig from a bottle he pulled from under the table. "Thought he was dead." "So did I," Jack said. "But he's not. He's in Cold Creek. Or close to it." Clayton didn't ask how Jack knew. He just ran a hand through his hair and stared at the fire. Jack sat across from him. "Samuel Holt. You remember him? Sure. Quiet type. Too smart for his own good. Someone pushed him into a well last winter. His son saw it. Drew that picture." Clayton let out a breath. Damn. He was investigating land fraud, forged deeds, pressure on homesteaders to sell, all tied to Union Western. "That figures," Clayton said. "That company's been carving up the valley for years, buying off surveyors, rerouting rail lines through land folks suddenly decide to sell. You stand in their way, you disappear. Did Samuel tell you anything before he died? He came up here once, maybe 6 months before he passed. Told me he had names, records. Said he couldn't trust anyone in town, that Wade had eyes everywhere." Jack's mouth tightened. Judge Wade, judge, mayor, banker, land registrar, hellman's half the damn county. Jack leaned forward. "I think he hired Crane to kill Samuel." "You think Clayton scoffed? Wade's been using killers and thugs in suits for years. He keeps his hands clean and lets someone else do the digging or the burying." Jack was quiet for a moment. "I need those records. They'd be hidden." Holt said he buried them. Said if he ever died, someone would have to dig up the truth. Sounded poetic at the time. Probably literal. Jack shook his head. He had a well. He died in it. Might not be a coincidence. Clayton let that sink in, then nodded slowly. "You planning to take this public?" "Not yet. I need more. I need names, dates enough to make it stick." "And then what?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "Then I burn it all down." Clayton studied him for a long beat, then stood up and pulled a bundle of papers from a locked drawer near the cot. "Take these. Letters from Wade's office. Maps. I copied what I could before I stopped caring. Figured I'd use them to light a fire if it came to that." Jack took the bundle, flipping through quickly. "You've been sitting on this for years, and you've been gone for just as long." Jack didn't argue. He tucked the papers inside his coat. "I need you," he said. Clayton snorted. "You always did. I mean it. If this goes the way I think it will, I can't stand alone. You planning a legal case or a gunfight, whichever comes first." Clayton took another long drink, then slammed the bottle down. "All right. But you should know something, what they're watching. If Wade or Crane gets wind that you're poking around, they won't wait for court papers. They'll come." Jack's jaw tensed. "Let them." Clayton nodded. "In that case, if you want justice," he tossed Jack an old Colt from a drawer. "Bring a gun." Jack caught it without flinching. Checked the barrel. Still clean. The wind shifted outside. A soft thud sounded against the cabin wall. Jack's body went rigid. You hear that Clayton was already moving toward the shuttered window. He pulled it open a crack and froze. Two figures stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by trees. Riders, Clayton said quietly. Don't look like loggers, Crane's men or Wade's. Jack holstered the Colt, grabbed the papers, and threw on his coat. They found me faster than I expected. Clayton moved to the other window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see. Only two, he said. But they're feeling bold showing up here. You want to make it 3? Clayton smirked. Been a while since I made someone regret breathing. Jack nodded. Let's do it quiet. We don't shoot unless they do. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the pines. The cabin door creaked as they opened it. Two men dismounted in the snow, one carried a shotgun, the other, a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Holt, the taller one, called. Judge Wade would like a word. Jack stepped into view, Colt resting casually at his side. You can tell Wade something for me, he said. Tell him I've already started talking. The grin slipped. Behind Jack, Clayton cocked his rifle. The standoff lasted seconds. Then the men backed off, climbed onto their horses, and rode off without a word. Jack exhaled. They're warning us, Clayton said. No, Jack replied. They're stalling. Crane's coming. Clayton looked at him. You sure? Jack nodded, jaw tight. And when he does, I want to be ready. Because next time it wouldn't be a message. It would be blood. You really think the law's gonna save you out here? The question came with a smirk, a sneer, and the dull edge of a Colt's barrel pressed against Jack Holt's cheekbone. Snow fell steadily around the small clearing behind the jailhouse in Cold Creek. The world was muted in white and gray, except for the dark circle of blood at Jack's temple and the hot breath of the man holding the gun. Deputy Ruth Calder stood just feet away, her revolver drawn but not raised. She hadn't spoken a word since Jack was jumped outside the general store half an hour earlier, pulled into an alley by two men beaten just shy of unconsciousness, then delivered here like a message wrapped in bruises. Now, with the cold biting into his back through the snow, Jack spit blood and said, No. I don't think the law's gonna save me, but it might bury you. The man with the gun leather coat, slicked back hair scar along his jaw, chuckled low. You think this is still about the law? Jack didn't blink. You're Crane's man. The smirk deepened. Not just his. I work for progress, for men with vision. Behind him, Ruth's voice came quiet but firm. Put the gun down. He turned to her, amused. Really, this the line for you, deputy. I said put it down. He didn't, not right away. But eventually, slowly, he lowered the Colt. Ruth's hand didn't shake, not even a little. Jack watched her face carefully, still unreadable, but something behind her eyes had shifted. She looked at the man. You deliver your message. Now get out. The thug gave Jack one last grin, holstered the pistol, and stepped back. Judge says if you don't leave Cold Creek in 24 hours, we stop being polite. Jack wiped the blood from his lip. This was polite. The man shrugged. We haven't even started being creative. He turned and walked off, whistling low. Ruth stood over Jack for a second longer, then finally holstered her weapon and crouched beside him. You all right? Jack nodded, though the pounding in his skull begged to differ. Took worse falling off a mule once. She reached into her coat and handed him a flask. He drank deep, then looked at her. Why'd you stop him? Ruth hesitated. Because I don't like cowards who beat on men when they're not looking. Jack studied her. And because part of you knows I'm right. She didn't deny it. Instead, she helped him to his feet. Come inside. You're bleeding like hell. The inside of the jailhouse was sparse and cold, like everything else in Cold Creek. A single stove glowed faintly in the corner. One desk, two cells, both empty. Jack sat down heavily on the edge of the desk, grimacing as he touched his ribs. Ruth handed him a rag and said nothing for a long time. Then I remember Samuel Holt. Jack nodded. He used to teach at the little schoolhouse before the money dried up. Said he'd give up law to live somewhere quiet. Raise his kid. Grow tomatoes. Didn't work out? No. She sat across from him, hat in her hands. I remember the day he died. Whole town heard it. The fall, the scream. You don't forget a sound like that. But no one did anything. She didn't answer. Jack leaned forward. I've seen men stay quiet out of fear. I've seen it out of loyalty or greed. But here in Cold Creek, this place is soaked in silence. Ruth looked away. You don't know what Wade has on people. Their debts, their land, their lives. You think you can blow in here with an old name and a dead man's notes and fix it? No, Jack said. I think I can remind people what courage looks like. That made her laugh sharp and bitter. Courage gets people killed. He didn't flinch. So does silence. They stared at each other for a long time. The fire popped in the stove. Finally, Ruth reached into her coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I found this last year. Didn't turn it in. Jack unfolded it. A copy of a deed. Samuel's name was scratched out in red ink, replaced with Union Western Holdings. No signature, no legal stamp. But it was dated just 2 weeks after his death. This is the forgery, Jack said, and proof they were already carving up his land before he was even cold. Ruth nodded. Jack folded the paper carefully. You holding anything else back? She hesitated. Then there's a ledger in Wade's office, safe under the floorboards. Lists, names, payments, properties. I saw it once when I was sent there with a summons. It's real. Jack's pulse quickened. I need that ledger. Ruth shook her head. You try to get it, you'll die. Wade's office is like a fortress now. Guards, dogs, rotating watches. Jack stood slowly, ribs aching. Then I'll need a distraction. You planning something stupid? Probably. He moved to the door. Ruth followed. Outside, snow was falling harder now. The wind carried the sound of bells from the church steeple. Midday. The town still looked quiet, but Jack could feel the storm building beneath it. You really think Wade's afraid of you? Ruth asked. I think he's afraid of the truth, and of what people might do when they finally see it. She didn't try to stop him. Instead, she said, You'll need help. Jack turned. You offering not yet, she said. But I'm watching. He nodded once. That's a start. She gave him something else before he left, an old badge, tarnished bent. Samuel's? He kept it in his desk, Ruth said. Said it reminded him of who he used to be. Jack took it gently. Maybe it'd remind him too. As he walked back through the town square, he saw Mary Beth standing near the well, bundled in her coat. Finn clung to her side. She waved. Jack raised a hand, but didn't stop. He had too much to do. He had 24 hours. And tonight, he'd ride to Wade's estate. Not for justice yet, but for a book full of names. Because if he was going to start this war, he needed to know exactly who was already bought. And who could still be saved. Some locks don't need keys, just timing silence and the right kind of nerve. Jack whispered the words to himself as he crouched beneath the porch of Judge Cornelius Wade's estate, waiting for the guard to finish his round. The night was moonless, cold enough to turn breath into fog and sweat into ice. Snow blanketed everything, muting the world. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called once, then was answered. Jack remained still, eyes locked on the back door 10 feet away. His fingers were numb, but his mind was razor sharp. Wade's estate sat on a rise just east of Cold Creek, tucked behind iron gates and a perimeter of pine. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress, high windows, thick shutters, 2 men posted at all hours. Jack had spent the afternoon watching from the ridgeline, noting the rhythm of their patrols. Now he was inside the fence, and timing was everything. The rear guard turned the corner, boots crunching off toward the stables. Jack moved. 3 quick steps through the snow, and he was at the back door. It was locked, of course, but not well. He pulled a thin sliver of metal from his coat. Old habits died hard. The lock clicked open in seconds. Inside, the air was warmer, stale with cigar smoke and brandy. Heavy rugs muffled his footsteps as he slipped through the servants' corridor. The walls were lined with portraits, mostly stern men in darker suits, their eyes cold and judgmental. Jack didn't look at them long. He moved with practiced ease, past the dining hall, past the study, into the judge's office. It was just like Ruth described: mahogany walls, a large desk, and a bearskin rug in front of the hearth. But it was the floor that mattered. Jack knelt by the desk and ran his fingers along the floorboards until he found the loose one. He lifted it carefully, wincing as the wood creaked. Beneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a black leather ledger bound tight with string. Jack didn't hesitate. He tucked it into his coat and replaced the board. He was already moving for the door when he heard a floorboard groan above him. Second floor. Voices. One low, firm. The other too familiar. Elias Crane. Jack froze. Wasn't supposed to take this long, Crane was saying. Then Wade's voice, smooth and dismissive. You told me Holt was finished. I told you he was gone. Not that he'd stay that way. Then make it permanent. Won't be quiet, not anymore. He's got people talking. Pause. You kill him now. Wade said you make him a martyr. Crane chuckled, and Wade sighed. If he has the ledger, he doesn't. We'd know. We better. Because if he gets it, and if he lives long enough to get to Missoula with it. The rest of the sentence was lost as Jack slid back into the corridor. He didn't need to hear more. They were afraid. That was something. He retraced his steps quickly, heart pounding now, not from fear, but from urgency. Every second longer in this house was a risk. He passed a coat rack, a silver cane leaning against it. Wade's. A man who thought himself untouchable. Jack almost laughed. At the back door he paused, then heard something that stopped him cold. Footsteps, fast, heavy, coming his way. He spun, ducked low, and slipped into a small pantry just off the hall. He pulled the door closed just as 2 guards rushed past, guns drawn. One of them muttered, "Windows open in the office." Jack held his breath. They passed, but now they knew. No more creeping. It was time to run. He burst from the pantry, sprinting for the back door. This time he didn't worry about silence. Alarms were already raised. He hit the snow running, vaulted the back steps, and darted across the rear lawn. A shot cracked behind him, missed wide. Another split the air near his ear. Then came the dogs. A deep growl and the thunder of paws on snow. Jack didn't look back. He reached the tree line and dove into the underbrush, rolling once, then sprinting again, zigzagging down the slope. The trees swallowed him. The howls faded behind. By the time he reached the base of the ridge, his lungs were on fire legs, shaking. But the ledger was still tucked under his coat, and that meant the game had changed. He didn't return to town. Instead, he followed the creek west toward the old ranger station he remembered from a decade ago. A place no one used anymore. A place to breathe. Inside, with the fire lit and the door barred, he finally opened the ledger. Names, dates, payouts, forged signatures, and then an entire section marked land transfers scheduled, post-clearing dozens of farms, nearly every homestead around Cold Creek, sold on paper before the owners even knew. And at the bottom of the list, Holt Samuel. Jack sat back. They'd planned it all. Every death, every sale, and they were going to finish what they started, unless he stopped them, unless he went public. He turned a page and found something else. A letter, folded, tucked between the pages, written in Samuel's hand. To whomever finds this, if you're reading this, it means I've failed. But the truth lives in this book. Use it. Don't bury it like they buried me. My son deserves better. Jack closed the ledger. His hands trembled, but not from cold. He had what he needed. Now he just had to survive long enough to use it. Tomorrow he'd head for Missoula, and if they came for him before then, well, he'd be ready. Because some locks don't need keys, just timing, silence, and the right kind of nerve. And Jack Holt had all three. They're not afraid of bullets. They're afraid of the truth. Jack said it without raising his voice, but it landed like thunder in the old ranger station. Clayton Briggs stood across the small room, arms crossed, rifle leaning against the wall beside him. Ruth Calder was pacing in slow, careful steps, her boots leaving damp marks on the wooden floor. And Mary Beth sat in the corner, arms wrapped around Finn, who was curled against her half asleep, but listening with the quiet intensity of a child who had seen too much to ever rest easy again. Jack had called them here before first light after a long, frozen ride back from the edge of the valley. He didn't wait to rest. He couldn't. He had the ledger in hand, Samuel's letter still folded inside. He laid the book on the table. This is everything he said. Wade's entire operation, every deal, every payoff, every stolen acre. Clayton opened it first. His fingers moved slower than usual. Reverent almost. Son of a bitch, he muttered. He was going to take the whole valley. Ruth peered over his shoulder. That's Judge Langley's name. And the old sheriff from Basin, hell, Reverend Morrison Jack, nodded. They bought the church land and funneled the deed through Morrison so it wouldn't raise flags. He sold it back to Union Western last fall. Mary Beth stood, slowly letting Finn rest against a folded blanket. Her voice was soft but steady. You think this ledger is enough? It's more than enough. I send this to the circuit court in Missoula, they'll have no choice but to act. Clayton scoffed. You think they'll ride in here on white horses and make arrests? Wade's had 10 years to build connections in every corner of this state. He doesn't just own the land, he owns the people on it. Maybe Jack said. But that's why I'm not sending it by post. I'm going myself. Ruth's head snapped toward him. That's a death sentence. Jack looked her dead in the eye. Only if I fail. She shook her head. Crane's still out there, and he's not going to let you walk away with that book. That's why I'm not going alone. Everyone fell silent. Jack turned to Clayton. You still know the high pass through Bear's Spine? Clayton grimaced. Yeah, but it's suicide in winter. Not if we move fast. No roads, no tracks. We go through the ridge line and come down near the south rail. Mary Beth stepped forward. What about me and Finn? You stay here. Ruth will keep you safe. Ruth raised an eyebrow. That so Jack gave her a look. You said you're watching. Time to do more than that. Ruth was quiet for a long beat, then nodded. I'll keep them safe. Mary Beth looked at Jack. You think you can get there in time? He looked at the map spread out on the table. Cold Creek to Missoula, a 3-day ride in summer. In snow with killers on their heels, it'd be twice that. If we leave tonight, and if the pass holds, maybe. He didn't need to say what happened if it didn't. Clayton closed the ledger and tied the strap around it again. We'll need supplies. Rope feed blankets. Jack nodded. And guns. If they catch us on the trail, we won't have time for speeches. Marybeth stepped in front of him suddenly. Take this. She held out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Jack opened it. Inside Samuel's revolver. Cleaned, loaded. He always said he didn't want to use it, she said. But he kept it anyway. Jack closed the bundle and tucked it into his coat. I'll use it to finish what he started. Finn stirred behind them. You promise you'll come back? Jack turned, looked him in the eye. I promise I'll try. That was the best he could offer. Later, as the day faded into another heavy dusk, Jack and Clayton saddled up two sturdy mountain horses and left the ranger station under cover of shadows. Ruth watched them go, rifle across her lap. Marybeth stood with Finn beside the window, not saying a word. The climb toward Bear's Spine was brutal. Wind tore at their coats. Snow came in flurries that stung the eyes. The trail narrowed into nothing more than a suggestion between trees and rocks, but Jack didn't falter. Every mile behind them meant another step toward justice, toward exposing the men who thought they could twist a town into silence. At one point near a frozen creek bed, Clayton asked, "You ever think about just disappearing, taking the ledger and running for some quiet piece of land out west?" Jack thought about it for a long second. Then I did that once. Disappeared. Left things broken behind me. You think this makes it right? But it makes it count. They camped that night in a grove of dead pines. The wind howled like wolves. Jack took first watch, staring into the fire with the ledger beside him. He thought about Wade and Crane and the look in Marybeth's eyes when she'd handed him the revolver. They weren't afraid of bullets. They were afraid of the truth. And that was what he carried now, wrapped in leather and in blood. By morning, they'd climb into the high pass, and someone, Wade Crane or both, would come hunting. But if Jack could hold the trail just 2 more days, everything would change. He ain't here for the bounty. He's here for the boy. The wind screamed down from Bear's Spine like a curse, blowing snow sideways in sheets that bit at the skin and blurred the world into smudges of white and gray. Jack pulled his scarf tighter over his mouth, squinting against the sting. His horse, a stocky mare named Nella, pressed forward with stubborn resolve, hooves sinking into deep powder with every step. Clayton rode just ahead, slightly off the trail, his eyes locked on the slope above them. He hadn't said much since they broke camp that morning, but Jack knew why. The prints, 4 sets, fresh, heading in the same direction they were, and one of them had that off-kilter drag Clayton recognized immediately. Crane. They were being hunted. And worse, the hunters knew exactly where they were going. We need to move faster. Jack muttered loud enough to cut through the wind. Clayton looked back, his beard caked with frost. Only way we move faster is if we leave the horses behind and start running. You want to do that? Jack didn't answer. He just leaned forward and urged Nella to keep moving. The trail was thinning, rising into a jagged ridgeline of rock and ice. Below them, the world dropped into sharp ravines and tree-choked gulches. They climbed for another hour before Clayton held up a hand. Jack reined in beside him. Just ahead, a narrow rock arch bridged 2 snow-swept ledges. Beyond it, the trail dipped into a frozen saddle, and then began its descent toward the southern pass. Clayton pointed. There, on the far side of the saddle, barely visible through the blowing snow, a small figure on horseback sat still, watching. Then 2 more flanked him, 1 to each side, slowly emerging from the white. A trap. Clayton turned to Jack. They're not rushing us. That's a message. Jack's hand drifted toward the revolver inside his coat. What's the message? That they don't need to rush. We're the ones running. Jack stared at the figure in the middle. Tall, still, confident. Crane has to be. A shot cracked suddenly from the ridge behind them. Snow exploded a foot from Jack's horse. The mare whinnied, nearly tossing him. Another shot closer this time. Down, Clayton shouted, diving behind a rock outcrop. Jack followed, scrambling off his horse and dragging the ledger with him. Bullets hissed through the air, echoing off stone and ice. One struck a pine trunk behind him, with a thunk splitting bark. We're boxed in, Clayton growled. Ridge behind, ambush ahead. Jack looked at the ledger. Still safe, for now. They could have taken the shot when we were exposed, he said. Why wait? Clayton peered over the rock. They want something. Then they heard it. Hoofbeats. Fast, coming from the west slope, a rider breaking through the white. For a moment, Jack thought it was back up some miracle. Ruth, a ranger, even Ezra. But then he saw the long rifle slung low, the bandolier of shells, and the dark, weather-worn duster flapping behind him like a flag of warning. Crane. He pulled up just shy of the rock line, not 10 yards from where Jack crouched. His voice was calm, amused. Holt, you still breathing? Jack didn't answer. Crane chuckled. I figured you'd be halfway to Missoula by now. But here you are, dragging your daddy's ghosts up a mountain. Jack rose slowly, staying behind cover. You should have stayed dead, Elias. Ah, now that ain't fair. I was never really dead, just forgotten. Clayton chambered around beside him, low and deliberate. Crane heard it. You know, he said, they put a price on your head back in Elkhorn. 2,500 dead or alive. Jack smirked. Guess I'm worth more than I thought. But that's not why I'm here, Crane said, and his voice dropped an octave. They think I'm here for the bounty. I'm not. He leaned forward slightly, and the saddle eyes dark. I'm here for the boy. Everything went still. Jack felt something cold settle in his chest, colder than the snow, colder than the wind. Crane continued. You think Wade cares about the ledger, about some old numbers, huh? What he's afraid of is what the boy saw. That kid don't even know what he's sitting on. You leave him out of this. Oh, I plan to. Crane said, voice syrupy now. Just as soon as I know for sure he's forgotten everything. Or buried, just to be safe. Jack stood from behind the rock, slowly, revolver in hand. I swear to God, Crane, save it. Crane said, suddenly bored. You don't have the stomach for this. You think carrying that book makes you dangerous? I've killed for less than what's in your coat. Jack raised the revolver. But before he could speak, another shot rang out, this one not from Crane, but from the ridge above. Crane jerked back in the saddle as a bullet grazed his shoulder. He hissed, whirled his horse, and vanished into the snow. Clayton stood, rifle smoking. Jack turned. You missed. Didn't want to kill him yet, Clayton muttered. Just wanted to shut him up. But the damage was done. Now they knew Crane wasn't just chasing the ledger. He was hunting Finn. Jack looked down at the bundle in his coat, then west toward the trail that led to the valley. We have to split up, he said. Clayton turned. What, you take the ledger? You know the pass better. Get it to Missoula. I'll go back to Cold Creek. Clayton grabbed his arm. You go back now, it's suicide. I don't care, Jack said. He's going after the boy. Clayton stared at him for a long second, then nodded. Take my horse. She's faster. Jack didn't hesitate. He mounted and turned toward the path that would wind him back down toward the town, toward Marybeth Ruth, and the child who'd trusted him with more than just the truth. He rode like the wind was chasing him, and in a way it was. Because Elias Crane wasn't just coming for a book. He was coming to erase the last witness. And Jack Holt would rather die than let that happen. If you're gonna kill a monster, you better stop feeding it. Snowmelt ran in dark rivulets along the edge of the town as Jack rode into Cold Creek. Just before dawn, his coat soaked through and mud caked up the legs of his horse. The sun was barely brushing the ridgeline, throwing long orange fingers across the rooftops. The town was quiet, too quiet. No smoke from chimneys, no early wagons moving along Main Street. It was the kind of stillness that warned you before the storm. He tied the mare behind the old tannery and made his way down the alley toward the ranger station. A shape emerged from the fog near the back door, rifle raised. Jack stopped in his tracks. "It's me," he said. Ruth stepped out of the shadow, lowering the rifle fast. "Jesus, Holt. Where are they safe for now?" She motioned for him to follow, quick and low. "After your message came through, we moved them. Mary Beth's holed up in the church basement with Finn. I've got 3 good men watching every entrance." Jack kept pace. Crane. "No sightings since yesterday, but Wade's dogs are moving. Men posted at the telegraph, the livery even outside the general store. They know something's coming. They always did," Jack muttered. Inside the ranger station, the fire was dead, but maps and weapons lay scattered across the desk, like someone had been prepping for war, which Jack realized they had. "You still got that list of names from the ledger?" he asked. Ruth nodded. "Back pocket." "Good. We're going to use them." Her brow furrowed. How Jack looked at her, tired but clear-eyed. "We call a town meeting." Ruth blinked. "A what? You heard me. In Wade's town, where half the folks are on his payroll and the other half are too scared to speak." Jack didn't flinch. "Then we give them something louder than fear." Ruth gave him a look, part doubt, part admiration. "You got a hell of a lot more faith in people than I do." "No," Jack said. "I just know what happens when nobody stands up." They set the meeting for midday. Ruth moved fast, her badge giving her just enough weight to go door to door without getting shut out. Jack sent word to Mary Beth and kept Finn hidden. Meanwhile, news spread fast because it always did in Cold Creek when it wasn't supposed to. By noon, nearly 50 people packed into the old church hall. Some stood. Some sat on overturned crates and benches. All wore the same expression, tension, and suspicion in equal measure. Jack stood in front, hands behind his back. Ruth beside him. Mary Beth near the rear, one hand on Finn's shoulder. When the murmuring stopped, Jack spoke. "I won't waste your time with sermons," he said. "You all know who I am. You all know why I'm back." A few nods. A few lowered eyes. "I came here chasing a ghost. My brother's. I thought if I could prove who killed him, I could finally bury something." He held up the letter, Samuel's final words. "But this isn't just about him. This is about every name in this town that got signed away before it was even offered. Every acre of land you worked, every deal that got rewritten in a back room." He pulled the folded copy of the ledger page from his coat. "I have the names. I have the proof. I've already sent it to Missoula." Murmurs rose like wind through the room. Some people stood straighter. Others looked toward the door. "And I know some of you are on that list." Now the room quieted again. "You had your reasons," Jack said. "Debt, threats. Some of you just wanted to feed your families. But here's the thing, if you're going to kill a monster, you better stop feeding it." Silence. Then a voice from the back, old Ezra hat clutched in both hands. "What do you expect us to do? Son Wade's got guns. Men. That judge can have you disappeared before dinner." Jack nodded. "I'm not asking you to fight him with rifles, just with truth." He turned to Ruth. She stepped forward and began reading names from the list. Deeds, dates, locations, a few gasps, some denials. but others they nodded slowly, as if they'd known it all along but needed to hear it out loud. Jack let them murmur again. Then Wade owns the land, the law, even the silence. But if we make noise loud enough long enough, the men upstate will have no choice but to listen. The train to Missoula rolls through here at first light tomorrow. We get the story on board. We get statements. We get signatures. Hell, we send a witness. He looked back at Mary Beth, then down at Finn. That's why I came back. A heavy pause. Then someone stood, Mrs. Alcott, widow of a rancher who'd lost everything 2 winters ago. I'll sign. And like falling dominoes, others followed. By the time the meeting ended, they had 24 names. Outside, snow began falling again. But with it came something else, momentum. Hope. Jack turned to Ruth. Tonight we keep them safe. Tomorrow we raise hell. Ruth gave a small, grim smile. About damn time. But just as they stepped down from the pulpit, a young boy burst through the door, panting hard. They're coming, he gasped. Crane's men, they're heading for the church, Shaniu. Jack looked at Ruth. No more hiding, he said. We make our stand here. And this time the town would stand with him. Sometimes justice doesn't ride in on a horse. It rises up from the ground beneath your feet. The words echoed in Jack's head as he stood near the church's front doors, revolver in hand boots, braced against the wooden floor, staring down the snow-swept main street of Cold Creek. Every breath turned to steam. Every heartbeat sounded like thunder in his ears. Across from him, the townsfolk moved with quiet urgency. Mary Beth was ushering Finn into the choir loft, a hidden rifle nestled beneath her coat. Ruth barked quick orders to the handful of able-bodied volunteers now armed and taking up positions behind pews and balconies near shuttered windows. This wasn't a battlefield. Not by design. But war had come anyway. Crane's riders were less than 10 minutes out. Jack had seen them, a dozen or more men armed and masked, riding hard from the North Ridge, likely hoping to strike before the town could brace. But they were too late. This time, Cold Creek wouldn't turn its eyes away. Ruth approached him, rifle slung over her shoulder, expression unreadable. You sure about this? Jack nodded. It ends today. You could still run. Get on that train with the boy, ride out before the blood hits the snow. I didn't come back to run. She studied him for a long second, then handed him a fresh box of shells. We hold them here. As long as it takes. Jack looked around the church. Not much of a fortress, but somehow it felt like the strongest building he'd ever stood in. He climbed the pulpit stairs and turned to face the crowd. This won't be clean, he said. They're coming fast, and they won't hesitate. But you're not just fighting for land or names on a page. You're fighting for each other. For what's rightfully yours. Don't forget that. Then he looked at Ruth. If I fall, you get the kid on that train. You're not falling, she said. But they both knew it was a coin flip. Outside, hooves began to thunder. The town held its breath. And then chaos. Gunfire cracked like lightning as Crane's men rode in spitting bullets into doors, windows, and walls. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Screams rose as the townsfolk returned. Fire crouched behind pews and benches, some shaking, some still as stone. Jack was already moving, firing once, twice, ducking behind the heavy front doors as a bullet punched through the wood inches from his head. He saw a rider fall near the well. Another tumbled off his horse, clutching his leg. But then came Crane. He rode slow, deliberate. Right down the center of the street, duster flapping, long rifle in hand like a staff of death. He dismounted in front of the church not 10 feet from the steps and called out, Jack, Holt, come out. Let's finish this like men. Jack exhaled through his teeth. He turned to Ruth. "Cover the windows." She nodded and pulled two others with her. Jack pushed open the church door and stepped outside. Crane smiled. "Didn't think you had it in you." "I've got more than you think," Jack said. "You really believe these people will die for you?" "No," Jack said. "I believe they'll live for themselves." He fired first. The shot grazed Crane's arm, sending him stumbling backward but not down. Crane recovered fast, ducked behind a hitching post, and fired back. Jack dove behind the stone steps. Bullets sparked off rock and rail. Crane shouted, "I should have killed the kid that night. Would have saved us both trouble." Jack growled low and rose, firing again. The shot missed, but then someone else stepped out behind Crane. Mary Beth. Rifle raised. "Steady, Crane," she shouted. He turned. Too slow. She fired. Crane screamed, dropped his rifle, and fell to one knee. Blood bloomed across his shoulder. But he wasn't done. He lunged toward her, knife drawn. Jack was already moving. He tackled Crane from the side, sending them both into the snow, fists flying. The knife slashed across Jack's arm, but he didn't feel it. He punched once, twice, bone cracking beneath his knuckles, until Crane slumped back unconscious or dead. Jack didn't care which. He stood bleeding, panting. Around him, the sound of gunfire was fading. One of Wade's men rode off, fleeing into the woods. Another threw down his weapon and surrendered. And the people of Cold Creek. They were still standing. Ruth walked out slowly, her face pale but eyes sharp. "It's over," she said. Jack looked around. At the broken windows, the blood in the snow, the bullet-pocked walls. "No," he said. "Now it begins." She tilted her head. "The rebuilding," Jack clarified. "The reckoning." They walked back into the church together. Finn came down from the loft and ran to Jack, who crouched and hugged him with one good arm. "You okay, kid?" Finn nodded. "You didn't let him take me." "Never would." Mary Beth approached quiet. "We held the line." Jack looked at her. "You did more than that." Outside, the town began to gather, bruised and bloody but alive. They had chosen to fight. And that, Jack thought, was how monsters died, not by bullets alone, but by people standing up, by truth made loud. And tomorrow, with the train rolling in and the truth headed for Missoula, justice would finally have its day. The train arrived just after sunrise. Its whistle cut through the morning fog like a blade, long and low, echoing off the hills and across the rooftops of Cold Creek. The sound startled birds into the air and sent a ripple of motion through the crowd gathered at the edge of the station. No one had spoken much on the walk over. They didn't need to. They came with purpose. Jack stood at the platform with the ledger tucked under his arm now bandaged tight across the bicep. Mary Beth stood to his left, Finn clinging to her hand. Ruth was on his right, hat pulled low, her eyes scanning the horizon like she still expected another ambush. But no one came. Not this time. Behind them, townsfolk gathered, some still bruised from the day before, others wrapped in scarves and coats, clutching signed statements, names written in ink and truth. What had once been fear was now something else. Heavier, but steadier. Resolve. The train hissed to a stop. A conductor stepped down, glancing at the crowd, with wide eyes clearly unprepared for the welcome committee. Jack approached him and handed over the parcel wrapped in oilcloth tied tight. "This goes to Judge Anders in Missoula. Personal delivery. Guard it like your own life." The conductor took it with a slow nod, sensing the weight of something he didn't fully understand. "It'll get there." Jack stepped back. That was all he could do now. The law would move slowly. It always did. But the truth was out. And once it was out, it had a way of spreading no matter who tried to bury it. Finn looked up at him. So, is it really over? Jack crouched beside him. Not all the way, but it started. That's the hard part. You're not going with it. Jack shook his head. No. My job was to make sure it got on that train. Yours is to live in a town that's better than the one I found. Finn thought about that, then nodded. I will. The train gave its final whistle. Steam rose, wheels turned, and the truth rolled away, bound for the place where justice still had a fighting chance. Jack watched it until it disappeared around the bend. Then he turned to Ruth. You gonna arrest me now? She smirked. For what? Stirring up a revolution. He raised an eyebrow. Breaking and entering, impersonating a martial assault. She shrugged. You planning on doing it again? No. Then I guess we'll call it even. They stood there a moment longer, letting the morning settle. Eventually, the crowd began to drift. Some back to their shops, others to the ruins of homes that needed rebuilding. A town bruised but breathing, changed. Mary Beth approached quietly. You're not staying. Jack looked at her, an apology already in his eyes. I don't belong here. Not long term. Cold Creek needs people who are part of its future. I was just the ghost who dragged the past into the light. She didn't argue. She simply took his hand and squeezed it. Samuel would have been proud. Jack swallowed hard. He should have lived to see it. She looked out at the town, at the people slowly starting to laugh again to rebuild. In a way, maybe he did. They stood there for a long time, the cold slowly giving way to the promise of spring. The snow was melting in patches, revealing muddy streets and stubborn grass that had managed to survive under the weight of winter. Jack finally turned toward his horse, already saddled near the stable. You heading west? Ruth asked. He nodded. Haven't decided how far yet. Maybe far enough to be someone new. You already are. Jack paused. Thought about that. Maybe. But part of him would always be the man who came back to a broken town looking for answers, who found something better. As he mounted, Finn ran over one last time, a folded paper in his hand. I made you this, the boy said, breathless. Jack opened it. A drawing rough and crooked, but clear enough, 3 stick figures, one tall man with a wide hat, one smaller boy, and a dog beside them. Jack smiled. You gave me a dog. Finn grinned. All heroes have dogs. I'll take that under advisement. He ruffled the boy's hair, tucked the paper into his coat, and gave Mary Beth one final nod. Then he rode out. No fanfare, no parades. Just the sound of hooves over wet earth fading down the trail that led away from Cold Creek. And behind him, a town waking up. No longer silent, no longer afraid. The story wouldn't end there, not really. Trials would come. Names would fall. Power would shift. And some people like Wade, would fight to keep what they had no right to. But the difference now, Cold Creek would fight back. Because once the truth is spoken, truly spoken, it can't be unsaid. It echoes. It roots itself in the ground. It passes from hand to hand, mouth to mouth. And sometimes justice doesn't ride in on a horse. Sometimes it rises up from the ground beneath your feet, from the hearts of people who remember how to stand. That was the real victory. That was what Samuel Holt died hoping for, and what Jack Holt lived to see begin.